Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar on increasing diversity on our public lands and waters. We are going to get started. So a few webinar reminders. All participants' microphones are already muted. During the presentation, if you have a question that you want to be addressed, make sure to write it on the Q&A box that's on the bottom of your screen, and there's also a small chat where we can also share some resources, or you can also ask your question there. Just for anybody that can't make it, or that you would like to share your presentation, the webinar is being recorded at the moment. And if you want the recording or any of the resources discussed in today's webinar, you can email me. My name is Sonia Rangel, and I'm the Chief Operation Officer for Corazon Latino, and my email address is sonia@corazonlatino.us. So I will pass it on to Felipe Benitez. He's the Executive Director of Corazon Latino, and he will be moderating.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and thank you very much for all of you who are participating. I think right now we're at 107 attendees, which by far it's one of our most successful webinars. We've been doing this from the beginning of the spring, and we're really thankful for all of you taking the time to join this webinar. I think it just speaks volumes of the desire, the need, and the appetite to really reach diverse communities into enjoying, into protecting, into caring for our public lands. So a very brief introduction of who we are. Corazon Latino is a 501c3 organization. We focus on designing and implementing culturally relevant campaigns, community engagement efforts to inform, empower, and mobilize diverse communities. We do this in topics such as conservation education, civic engagement, social justice, health issues, and we, as I mentioned, we do it through strategic communications and outreach activities. Today we have a stellar webinar. You see the names of our speakers. I will talk a little bit in detail before they talk, but very briefly, Tony Richardson from National Environmental Education Foundation, my dear friend and role model, Robert Garcia, founding director and counsel for the City Project, my hermanita, Irene Vilar, from Americas for Conservation and the Arts, American Latino EcoFest, and Manuel Vilar Press, and many other initiatives that she will probably be sharing with us today. And last but not least, our own Melissa Martinez, who's a resource assistant at the U.S. Forest Service, working under a fellowship with Hispanic Access Foundation. All great leaders on the space, and I'm really excited to be hosting this webinar. A couple of years ago, Michiko Martin, who's the Director of Recreation, Heritage, and Volunteer Services at the U.S. Forest Service, told me during a conversation that the most patriotic thing you can do is to care and protect for our public lands. And that really resonated with me. I mean, what more democratic, accessible element of our country than our public lands? We're fortunate enough to do a lot of work with local communities here in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia areas, where we serve underserved communities, limited English proficiency communities, immigrant communities that may not have necessarily the opportunities or the resources or even the time sometimes or the knowledge to care and to enjoy our public lands, and we create these opportunities for them. And one of the things that we always tell them, one of the messages that we always convey is that we do this because we want everybody to enjoy our public lands. It's our right. Everybody who lives in this country has the right to enjoy our public lands. But that right comes with responsibility. And the responsibility is to care for them. It's to be stewards and basically to protect them. It's to save them. It's to protect them for this and future generations. Before we start with our amazing lineup, I do want to make a quick comment. We want to recognize and understand that diversity and inclusion is a broad topic that includes taking necessary steps to welcome individuals and families from many diverse communities, African American, Asian American, Native American, LGBT individuals, and families with disabilities. Today we're we're heavily focusing in the Latino community, but by no means this is the end or one solution fits everybody. We want this to be at the beginning of a conversation, and I know there's groups out there, even Tony's group. Tony is a volunteer with Afro Latino that may have best practices, experiences, insights on how to reach other diverse communities, and we want to continue this conversation. So please feel free to reach out to us, either to Tony, to myself, Felipe, and I will give you our contact information, and we can continue to organize events like this one and offer resources like this one to reach every family and anybody in this country of us. So having said that, I want to get it started and introduce you our first speaker, Tony Richardson, who's a program officer at Focus on Public Lands Engagement at the National Environmental Education Foundation. And oh man, he started a few months ago and he has done a tremendous mark in with his leadership and the amazing team of NIF. They have brought and organized this year's National Public Lands Day, which I'm sure as every year it improves and gets better with age as good wine. This year is not going to be the exception, and we're expecting, we're seeing all these great developments and these great efforts. And one of those, which makes me extremely proud and extremely grateful for the work that NIF has put behind, is offering resources and tools for Latino communities, Spanish-speaking communities. Again, National Public Lands Day offer us an opportunity to engage, to have a meaningful experience for immigrant communities, for Latino communities. And with these resources, I think we're gonna help advance in a way that we haven't seen in other years. So without further ado, I wanna leave it to Tony and tell you what great work and what big surprises NIF has for us. Go ahead, Tony.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the kind words, Felipe, and thank you for all of the webinar attendees for joining us today. As Felipe said, my name is Tony Richardson, and I'm with the National Environmental Education Foundation. I am very, very happy to be speaking on this webinar today. In addition to my work with NIF, I am also a local leader with Outdoor Afro, and I also serve on the Appalachian Trail Conservancy's Next Generation Advisory Council, which is focused on helping the Conservancy reach a younger and more culturally diverse audience. So these are the issues that we're talking about today are things that I am very much invested in, both personally and professionally. So just want to say thank you again for having me. Next slide, please. So just to give you guys an overview, I have just 2 slides quickly that I want to touch on diversity in public lands. I'm not going to dive too deeply because you guys will hear a lot about that from our other presenters. I also want to share some success stories from NEAF and just some of the programs and initiatives that we have implemented to help engage diverse communities. I'm going to talk a lot about National Public Lands Day, and then I'm also going to share with you all some of the new Spanish language resources that we have created with Corazon Latino and with the Forest Service. Next slide, please. So this is the definition of public lands that we have on the National Public Lands Day FAQ. So public lands are the special places Americans use for outdoor recreation, education, and just plain enjoyment. They encompass a lot of different types of land, including state, county, and city parks. But the most important thing that I want to point out on this slide is that we really believe that these are our public lands. They're equally owned by all people, and they should be equally enjoyed by all people. Next slide, please. So just to sort of set the stage, I wanted to share just one finding from a really, really great report. It was called The Nature of Americans, and I would highly encourage all participants to check out this report if they haven't done so already. So researchers conducted a study of about 12,000 adults, children, and parents from across the United States. And one of the major findings that came out of this study was that communities of color encounter additional barriers when trying to connect to the outdoors. I'm not going to get into sort of what all those barriers are. Like I said, I would recommend you go check out this report. It gets very, very detailed. The entire report is about 300 pages long, but this was one of their major findings. And they also found that this disconnect over time is expected to have some really significant long-term impact on the future of our public lands. Next slide, please. And so this is something that the National Environmental Education Foundation is working to address, this sort of disparity. And just to give you guys a little bit of information about who NEAF is, in case you're unfamiliar, we are an organization, nonprofit, that was congressionally chartered by Congress in 1990. We were charged with advancing environmental literacy nationwide and facilitating public-private partnerships in support of environmental education. So we are really trying to equip everyone across the country from coast to coast with the knowledge that they need to truly understand our relationship to the environment. Next slide, please. We have a vision that is pretty bold. It is that by 2022, 300 million Americans will actively use environmental knowledge to ensure the well-being of Earth and its people. Next slide, please. In order to reach that goal of 300 million Americans, it is very, very important that NEAF is looking for ways to engage all segments of the population. These are really the main strategies. These 4 are the main strategies that NEAF uses. These 4 are the thread that are common from sort of all of the programs and initiatives that we do at NEAF. And I'm just going to go in and give you guys a little bit of information, some specific examples of the ways that we've used these strategies to engage diverse communities. Next slide, please. So the first thing that I would like to share with you all is some information about how we're preparing the next generation. We have a really fantastic program that is called Hands on the Land, and is the nation's largest network of field classrooms. This is something that NEAF has been heavily involved in for a long time now, for a couple of years now. And through one example of some of the great work that we're doing is in partnership with the National Park, excuse me, in partnership with the National Park Service and the U.S. Department of Education, we were supporting sites, National Park Service sites, and nearby 21st century learning centers, BCLC schools, to engage specifically Native American youth in place-based learning and citizen science. And really, the projects were designed to provide youth with culturally relevant park experiences and real-world opportunities and opportunities to see sort of everything that they're learning in the classroom, but in the real world. This program had a strong focus on working with tribal youth And I think that if there's one takeaway sort of from this example, it's that partnerships are really key. This work wouldn't be possible without our partners at the National Park Service, the U.S. Department of Education, and with the support of the 21st Century Learning Centers. Next slide, please. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is the way that NEAF is engaging people every day. And I think that sort of NEAF, I think, is very, very good. And what I'm learning is we're very innovative in trying to utilize mainstream communication channels to reach people where they are. Different people respond to different messages. And so particularly the example you're seeing here is we partnered with NBA Green to share energy saving tips with the NBA's extremely broad audience. I think that one major takeaway from here is sometimes the messenger is more important than the message, or can be as important or more important than the message itself. I think another great example is what we're doing here today with Cortisone Latino. You know, we knew that we had a goal of wanting to work more with Spanish-speaking and Latino communities, and we really look to see, you know, how can we be working with someone that's already a great messenger and someone that's already reaching these audiences. Next slide, please. I would also like to just talk briefly about sort of NEAF's, the ways that we help advance the field, and how specifically that focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so grants is a really big way that NEAF helps to advance the field by just getting that financial support out into the field and making sure that we are helping to increase the capacity of people to do great work. There are two examples from our Centennial and Beyond grants that I'd like to share. One is the C&O Canal Trust, who worked on engaging Latino and African American communities. They did this through new partnerships, the development of bilingual materials, as well as things like waiving fees, you know, decreasing some of the financial barriers to engaging with public lands. And then the other one that I'm just really, really was so excited to learn about when I started working at NEAF is Friends of Sleeping Bear Dunes, and they are working to better serve community members with physical disabilities. And so they're ensuring that they have access to and are able to enjoy Wisconsin's natural resources. And here's a really great picture of the type of work that they're doing. And so, you know, those are sort of three specific examples of the way that NEAF uses those strategies to engage diverse communities and to support the field in engaging diverse communities. Next slide, please. So there was the fourth strategy that NEAF uses is connecting people to nature. And for the connecting people to nature slide, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into National Public Lands Day specifically. So if you're unfamiliar, National Public Lands Day is the nation's largest single-day volunteer effort for public lands. It is a really, really big event. I believe last year we engaged nearly 200,000 people across the country and over 2,000 sites. So through MTLD, the National Environmental Education Foundation, NEAF works with its partners to connect people to public lands in their community, inspire environmental stewardship, and encourage the use of public lands for education, recreation, and general health. Next slide, please. I hope all of you are familiar with National Public Lands Day because it is a really fantastic opportunity to engage diverse communities. And there's a couple reasons why. One, National Public Lands Day is a celebration of public lands at all levels, federal, state, and local, which means multiple access points. I think that in particular, sort of the local and state parks allow additional opportunities for people to engage with nature and locations that are close to home. And so I think that that's something huge. You know, those are events and those are sites that people can go to on their own. They can catch public transportation to and things like that. And so, you know, we love working with our federal partners, and that was really the start of National Public Lands Day, but we also love working with our state and local partners as well. National Public Lands Day is also a fee-free day for all participating federal agencies. So for those federal sites, that's helping to lower some of the financial barriers to engaging with those public lands. And then this year is a really big year, important milestone for us. It's the 25th annual National Public Lands Day celebration. And we've seen an increased interest from the general public and just wanting to come out and participate in this celebration. Next slide, please. The last thing that I'd like to share with you all is we are just so thrilled to announce the launch of a suite of Spanish language resources. These resources were developed through a collaboration between NIF, the U.S. Forest Service, and Corazon Latino. The hope is that this new suite of Spanish language resources will help encourage a greater level of engagement with Spanish-speaking communities. And I'm going to share just a couple of the resources with you. This is not the full list of resources that are available, and all of the resources that you will see are open to the public and free to download. So we would love to see you guys using these, as much as you're able to. Next slide, please. The first thing is our National Public Lands Day landing page. So if you know about National Public Lands Day, I'm sure you've been to our English language landing page. It gets a ton of views, especially now that we're getting close to National Public Lands Day. It gets so many views. And this page mirrors the English language page. So while NIF has had other bilingual materials in the past, I think this is the first time where we've really offered sort of a dedicated Spanish language landing page. And we're really excited about the possibilities and the potential of this landing page. Next slide, please. We have also launched some Spanish language logos. And so this is the official 25th annual celebration logo. And these, again, are free to download. This would, I think, be a great thing for you to add to a flyer or something like that if you are looking specifically to engage Spanish-speaking communities. And I think just can help add another layer of sort of authenticity and genuineness to the work that you're doing. Next slide, please. We have also have a set of about 12 Spanish language MTLD graphics. These are really, really cool. They can help get the word out about MTLD on a whole, but also can be used to help promote your specific event. And they're supposed to be digestible, retweetable, and kind of fun. Each one has a fun fact about either volunteering or about spending time on public lands. Next slide, please. And the last thing I will share is just our event locator. So we also this year launched the new and improved MTLD, just event locator. It's not just for MTLD. You can find a variety of events. You can find health events, environmental education events, cultural and historic events as well. But the really, really cool thing about this is folks can actually use this to search bilingual events, and they can find bilingual events that are happening in their communities. There is a drop down, and it's just a checkbox that they would have to check to filter to see only bilingual events. Next slide, please. And then this is just a picture of what the map is. So once people go in and they actually start searching for an event, this is what will pop up. And of course, for the bilingual events, they will often have their information in both languages. Next slide, please. And so in conclusion, I would just like to thank you all again. I hope that everyone was able to learn at least one idea or learn about one new tool that they can use to engage diverse communities. And please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or suggestions or anything like that. And thank you again.
Thank you very much, Tony. And again, thank you very much for your leadership and for all the team behind it. It takes a village to get all these materials and all these tools ready. So thank you to Neve and thank you for the shout out. I also want to make sure that we mention the U.S. Forest Service Limited English Proficiency department or area with our friend Ricardo Martinez, who has also helped not only in this but in many efforts on providing translations of materials that are related to the work that the Forest Service does to engage diverse communities. The next speaker today, it's Melissa Martinez. She is very young, I'm gonna say, here, but it's very young, but very accomplished leader. As I mentioned, she's a resource assistant from the U.S. Forest Service. And you've probably seen a lot of materials about the Wild and Scenic Rivers 50th anniversary in Spanish language aimed to Latino communities. And let me tell you that the force, or a big force behind it, has been the leadership of Melissa and obviously the whole team of the Wild and Scenic Rivers. But you'll see her those great accomplishments. And I'm telling you, Melissa has done a lot in just a few months here, but just wait in a few years. She is an up and rising star, and wait, you'll see this girl is gonna is gonna be a very bright start on this work. And thank you, Melissa, for all that, for your input, for your leadership, and for making things happen. That's what we love working with you. So having said that, let us, Melissa, would you please tell us a little bit about the Wild and Scenic Rivers anniversary?
Yeah, thank you so much, Felipe. That's so kind. Access Foundation, like Felipe mentioned. And so I just wanted to hop on here for a bit and talk to you guys about the 50th anniversary of Rivers and Trails, how it's being celebrated throughout this year, specifically around National Public Lands Day, and how we're working to make it a more inclusive celebration. And with that, I'll give you a couple of examples around the end just to just show you something a bit more tangible. And so I am very, very grateful to have the opportunity to present with such incredible people on the work that they've done. And so kind of just to let you know, for those of you who might not know, so along with the 25th anniversary of National Public Lands Day, this year also marks the 50th anniversary of Wild and Scenic Rivers, as well as the National Trail System Act. And so these are two pieces of landmark legislation that serve to protect designated rivers and trails. Only that's less than 1/4% of all rivers. And some of the trails that are being celebrated are the Pacific Crest Trail, the Appalachian Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail. So although these rivers and trails aren't particularly all over the country or very common, with these anniversaries, we're really celebrating all rivers and trails across the country and the connections they provide for both their local communities and all users that come and visit them. So we want to make sure that everyone's able to find their closest waterway or trail and take ownership of their public spaces. And it's important that the public understand that these acts are significant because they're a tool that land management agencies like the Forest Service, as well as other partners and communities all utilize to keep our trails and rivers protected and accessible to the public as a resource. So in the management of these public spaces, community members are vital about stewardship around rivers and trails. So along with the theme of restoration and resilience that National Public Lands Day is highlighting, they're also highlighting these anniversaries as key themes, which is awesome. Next slide. So the 50th anniversary are both year-long celebrations. They're celebrations that are taking place in a number of ways through activities, stewardship projects, festivals, presentations, and in a number of different ways people have been incorporating the 50th. So there's just a lot of different things that are happening throughout the year. And so if you visit our website on rivers.gov or trails50.org, you'll see event maps where you can see events that have been going on throughout the entire year. And so these websites also have extensive toolkits and they're incredible toolkits. They have a number of resources. So they have things from just general information about what rivers and trails are to finding your nearest wild and scenic river trail, marketing and messaging tips, photos and videos, ways to highlight narratives, as well as the logos. So there's a number of tools that are available to help make these celebrations easier to incorporate to things that are happening or from building an event from the ground up. Next slide. So through my work, I have the opportunity to work with rivers events across the country, which has been an incredible experience. Some of these events from the ground up, or some of these events just jumping in on varying stages of the planning process. And so some of the things that I like to check in on with any event before I jump in is kind of have a sit partnerships already exist and what representative leadership is there. So does your leadership and their interests reflect the communities that you want to serve? What partners or local organizers can you bring to the table and make that possible? we want to make sure that we're serving the communities that we want to incorporate correctly, and having people from the beginning in those leadership roles is important. And so another thing that I like to make sure that is incorporated into whatever the event is an aspect of cultural and location-based relevance. So what kind of content is being shared? Is that relevant to the communities you're serving? Are the environmental issues that you're highlighting important to that community? Why is that? And how can you best share that? And so another piece that I also definitely look at is making sure.
Melissa, your connection is a little bit weak, so sometimes we lose you. Melissa, we're having issues with your connection. I don't know if there's any way that you can get a better signal.
Give me 1 second, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Okay. Is that better?
Much better. Please go ahead. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, no problem at all. So yeah, then I take a look at accessibility and resources. So seeing what exists, what kind of content can be created. If that's not there, where can we get that from? Does that actually need to be built from scratch, or is there a resource we can already use to kind of tailor it to the needs of whatever we're working on? And also making sure that when we're kind of establishing these resources, and partnerships. So making sure that there's that key to sustainability. And the final piece when we're talking about outreach is kind of looking at directed media and broadcast communications. So finding the way that not only works best for the community itself, but also with the resources that you have. So it'd be incredible to always get to do radio broadcast in whatever community that is, but if not, finding creative ways to do that with what you have that's available. Next slide. So one event that I wanted to kind of talk about, because I do get to work on the national level, and I also get to work in my own backyard, which is awesome. And so for Latino Conservation Week, which happened in July, we hosted an event with the Potomac Conservancy and Corazon Latino around rivers. And so we wanted to continue that relationship and incorporate the Anacostia River Keepers this year and do an event around the Anacostia River, which is a state designated wild and scenic river. And so one thing that I believe will make this event a success is that we have such strong partnerships in the people that are playing key roles in organizing. So the Anacostia River Keepers have familiarity with outreach in the communities in the area. Corazon Latino is incredible at activating Latino communities in the DC area, and as well as creating media for it. Here at the Forest Service, we definitely have those educational resources that we can bring out to kind of highlight the environmental issues and create relevance for these communities. And so kind of in creating this partnership, it was incredible to have the opportunity to elevate these partnerships communities. So in particular for this event, we found a need to add additional outreach around after-school programs and community centers that the Anacostia River identified for us. And we're going to collectively go out and do that outreach together. Next slide. I think we're missing one of my slides, but I just wanted to also briefly mention a couple of other incredible events that are happening. One of them is being run by the Curtin River Conservancy. And typically they host a number of incredible events throughout the school year to promote river stewardship on the Kern River, which is a wild and scenic river. And I had met them at River Rally, and traditionally they focus a lot of their attention around millennials. And so they wanted to open it a bit more to the Latino community. And in doing so, we decided we would make it more family focused, a bit more multi-generational. And so they were incredible in stepping up to the plate and doing that. And so the outreach that they've directed, or the groups that they have brought in include the local Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, their local after-school programs, doing a lot of youth-based outreach, and then also making sure that they have Spanish speakers running the outreach itself. So they have river rangers from the local Forest Service that are going out and doing that outreach. The search and rescue for Kern County, they also have a group of Spanish speakers there who are also helping do that outreach, and they're also going to have a strong presence at the event. And another event that I also wanted to briefly mention was the New Mexico Interdependence Day that's happening in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service and the Hispanic Cultural Center. And I really content around rivers and trails and kind of helping create those connections. So it looks a bit beyond just the recreation that the rivers and trails provide in the area, and more so provides the cultural relevance that's really important to events like these. So yeah, I just wanted to go ahead and share those pieces with you. And again, thank you so much for having me. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those at the end.
Thank you very much, Melissa. And I apologize for everybody. We've been having some connectivity issues, but hopefully the message and the core points that Melissa wanted to make came across. If not, please make sure to send us an email, send her an email directly if you have any questions or comments. Additionally, we know that there's a lot of you who dial in, so we will be sending the PowerPoint presentation in PDF. If you want us to send it to Sonia at corazonlatino.us or Facebook, or send us a Facebook inbox, whatever makes it, whatever is easier for you. We'll also we're getting some requests about publishing the content of the recording of the webinar. We will do so probably in our Facebook or our YouTube channel, so stay tuned for that. We'll make sure that we share that information with you. Again, a very well attended webinar. Thank you very much for joining. Our next speaker is Robert Garcia, founding director and counsel at the City Project. Robert, he's a leader and advocate for, and for many of us, a role model. I want to say that without Robert, there wouldn't be a Latino environmental justice movement as we know it in this country. His work, his stellar credentials, his track record have helped millions of Latino and underserved communities in California, in the country, and in as far as Central and South America, in advancing basic and human health rights. I am honored to consider Robert a friend, a mentor, an ally, but most important, a friend. Robert is also a NIF board member, and for the past few years, the City Project has organized and conducted really exciting and meaningful NPLD events in California. So, Robert, please take it away.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Felipe. I want to assure everybody that none of it is true, except for the fact that I am Felipe's friend, and I can consider him a mentor and a role model, not only for me, but for Latinos all across the country. Thank you very much, Felipe. One of the high points in the work of the City Project and in equal access to public lands for everybody was when President Barack Obama in 2014 dedicated the San Gabriel Mountains National Monument in Southern California. And he flew out personally to do that dedication. And he explicitly recognized and said in dedicating the monument that there is not enough park space, especially for children of color and low-income children. This is an issue of social justice. And for his administration, access means access for all, young and old, Black, white, Latino, Asian, and Native American. And we were very proud to meet with the president that day. And we have a comic book, not just about that day, but about the work that the City Project has done for 20 years and continues to do. Because we really do believe This is not rocket science. You don't need to be an attorney or a public health expert or a city planner. The comic book is only 20 pages long, but it summarizes the values at stake, the legal standards that apply, and many of the best success stories that we've had the good fortune to work on over the past 20 years. And in the balloon coming out of my head, we state there what the values are, because it's not just about conservation and land and water, as important as those are. It's about civil rights and environmental justice, health equity, climate and conservation justice, economic vitality, including jobs in parks, and avoiding green displacement, and having fun, which is most important, because that's what really draws people into the parks. Next slide, please. This past April, Anahuac Youth Sports Association, with whom the City Project has worked for almost our entire existence, and the City Project celebrated on Cesar Chavez's birthday the ribbon cutting of Martin Luther King Jr. Grove here in Los Angeles at Baldwin Hills Park. And what better example can there be of people coming together on that day, a milestone in the Latino civil rights movement, a milestone in the African-American civil rights movement, to celebrate through a walk in the park and the dedication of a grove, the work that both Cesar Chavez did and Martin Luther King did. And Cesar Chavez is best remembered today as a labor organizer, and he was a fantastic labor organizer. But he was also one of the early leaders of the move for environmental justice and health equity. The organizing for the farm workers included stopping the pesticides that were poisoning the people. And that's no longer well known, especially in the mainstream environmental movement, but it is an absolutely critical part of Cesar Chavez's work. And similarly, Martin Luther King, in his letter from Birmingham jail, explicitly talks about Fun Park and how does a black man explain to his little black daughter that she can't go to the park because it's for white people only. And again, those themes are echoed in President Obama's comments that access means access for all, young and old, black and white, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, everybody. Next slide, please. As I said, Anahuac Youth Sports Association and City Project have long worked to use parks and soccer as organizing tools to bring people together and create the kind of community where they want to live and raise children. And as Raul Macias, the founder of Anahuac, says, Anahuac is not about creating good soccer players. It's about creating good citizens and good stewards for the earth and her people and the future generation that will govern the nation. Next slide, please. And on National Public Lands Day in 2017, last September, Anahuac and the City Project worked with NEAF, with funding from NEAF, to do the National Public Lands Day at Rio de Los Angeles State Park at Taylor Yard along the LA River. That park would not exist but for the fact that Anahuac was a plaintiff in a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles and a wealthy developer to prevent a big box project from going up there in favor of creating what is now Rio de Los Angeles State Park at Taylor Yard. That and a similar victory at what is now LA State Historic Park kicked off the greening of the LA River, one of the biggest and most important urban revitalization projects in the nation today. Congressman Jimmy Gomez, personally went to the park that day to talk to the children about how important parks and recreation is. And what an important message to the children, mostly immigrant, disproportionately low income, disproportionately Latino, who can't afford soccer fields and fees and uniforms and balls. NWAC provides all that free of charge. But what a thrilling symbol for each of those children to see a congressman speaking to them, and each of them thinking, if I'm a good enough soccer player, someday I can be in Congress, someday I can be president. Similarly, there's a park ranger standing there, Luis Rincon, who is in charge of education, interpretation, and culture for state parks in Southern California. And his presence in uniform there, again, signaled to the children, people in uniform are here to serve you and work with you. We are not here to deport you. And don't be afraid when you see a person in uniform. I am here for you, first of all. And second, Ranger Rincon himself recited the history of Anahuac and the city project, and our allies fought to create that very park where they were playing that day. Next slide, please. Some of the allies that took part in that event included NEAF, Anahuac, the city project, the National Parks Conservation Association, National Park Service, California State Parks, but also Green Latinos, who many of you know as a national environmental and social justice organization. Juan Justice, excuse me, Juan Justice sent an attorney to advise families on immigration law and their rights as immigrants. League of United Latin American Citizens, the nation's largest Latino civil rights organization and oldest, was there recognizing the importance of park access to people of color. The LA County Department of Public Health had materials in English and Spanish about the connection between parks and health. Next slide, please. The connection between parks and health is not just about nature in the sense of someplace far away, although that's important too. And Anahuac, again, with the city project, National Park Service, our friends at Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, we have had a successful transit to trails program, which was in part responsible for the federal Every Kid in the Park program. This is in 2016, for the 100th anniversary of the National Park Service, we did a transit to trails trip, Every Kid in the Park trip, to the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. But it's also important to keep in mind, transit to trails trips like that, it's not enough to do one and you're done. You have to keep taking the children and their families and friends back to form a personal connection, first of all. And second, every day, these children are not going to go on a transit to trails trip or out into the wilderness. That's why local park access is so important. Next slide, please. And programs like soccer. This is a map of California produced by United States Environmental Protection Agency. And you can do a similar map for any state in the nation and any smaller community in the nation. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency actually maps where the parks are, the communities with the greatest health vulnerabilities, and the communities with the greatest exposure to toxics and pollution. To nobody's surprise, it's the same communities. People of color and low-income people. lack park access, suffer from the worst health, and suffer from the greatest exposure to toxics. Next slide, please. We work with the LA County Department of Parks and Recreation to do a similar analysis, more detailed for LA County. And again, park needs, people of color, low-income people, health vulnerabilities, it's always the same people. And some folks say, well, we don't have the data like that for us to target a National Public Lands Day event or a Transit Trails event. Yes, you do, because this city project first worked with Green Info Network to map the entire state of California at the census tract level to create what's called CPAD, the California Protected Areas Database. And using the lessons learned from that, we worked with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to upload that data into their EJ Screen tool, and US EPA then mapped the entire nation. So anybody can map and analyze the demographics of access to parks and recreation, health, and toxics pollution in their community. Next slide, please. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine is an august body. It is a federal agency. It's funded by Congress and other means. And their role is education. They are not advocates. They are scientists, engineers, doctors, public health experts. They did a report in 2017, one of the 5 most downloaded reports published by the National Academies that year, recognizing the social determinants of health include park access, first of all, and second, next slide, please, recognizing that civil rights strategies are necessary. Next slide, please. Civil rights strategies are necessary to address those disparities. And that includes enforcing civil rights laws like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as well as funding organizations like Anahuac that disproportionately serve people of color and low-income people who otherwise cannot take part in many of these activities. City project as well, for that matter. Next slide, please. Most recently, 2 major developments. One is the presidential memorandum in 2017 on diversity and inclusion in parks, waters, and monuments, which is exactly about the topic of this webinar. And President Obama, in that memorandum, based on existing law, addresses what federal agencies and recipients of federal funding, such as NEF, have to do to promote diversity, inclusion, and equal access, not only in the workforce, but in the visitation rates to public lands, waters, and monuments. They must also provide training on diversity, inclusion, and discrimination. Similar requirements apply to all recipients of federal funding, and the memorandum called for an action plan within 1 year. We're still waiting for an action plan like that from many agencies and recipients of federal funding. More recently, just in June of this year, California voters voted to tax themselves in order to create $4.1 billion with a B for park and water resources. And there's an entire Section 8 in that proposition based on that presidential memorandum. So Proposition 68 establishes standards, and in order to receive funding from those $4 billion, recipients of state financial assistance, as well as state agencies, must conform to those requirements. We were happy to work with the White House on the presidential memorandum and with state legislative leaders to craft Prop 68. Next slide, please. In short, again, somebody kindly posted the link to the comic book. This is not rocket science. Sam Garcia, an undergraduate at Stanford, published that comic book. And it outlines the 5 simple steps to address equity and diversity. 1, describe what you plan to do. 2, analyze the benefits and burdens on all people, including people of color. 3, analyze alternatives. 4, include people of color and low-income people in every step of the decision-making process. And finally, 5, have an implementation plan to distribute benefits and burdens fairly and avoid discrimination. That is all I have time for. I am profoundly grateful to Felipe and the U.S. Forest Service, Corazon Latino, NIF, for including us in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. We are almost to the hour. I know we originally advertised it for an hour, but for those who need to jump off, we will continue recording. We want to make sure that everybody gets Irene's presentation is really, really inspiring. So I want to make sure that she has the time to present. But for those who need to leave, because we know it's hectic times, be sure that we will continue recording and it'll be available. I want to present our last speaker, Irene Vilar. She's mi hermanita. As I mentioned earlier, she's the founder of Americas for Conservation of the Arts, American Latino Ecofest, Mandel Vilar. And she's a writer, an activist, a conservation leader. And she has done, brought the environmental conservation movements together in a very, very, very interesting and very innovative ways. She, last year when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, she, obviously the blood code, she's Puerto Rican, she's Boricua, and she immediately mobilized, activated the networks, and with a tremendously talented team and passionate individuals, she created a program, many programs, but one of them was La Guagua Solidaria, which provides support to farmers in the island. She also brought bringing a lot of young people and bringing those connections between resilience, between farming, between health and nature. So Irene, always an honor to have you and consider you my hermana. Last year, I remember she organized an amazing, or her team organized an amazing NPLD event with more than 400 kids in Denver, a BioBlitz. And I think this year is going to be as exciting as last year. So Irene, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Felipe. You're too kind. You're my adorable brother, and gracias so much for the opportunity to be in this platform. I am so incredibly honored to be in the same space with Robert Garcia, who I adore, and he knows that, and he owes me a hug, and I owe him one too. But in any event, hopefully I can bring you, Robert, in December to Denver. Very, very honored to actually speak after you. There is very little to say after someone like you speaks, because you are a legacy. But in any event, picking up on what you were talking about, the importance of economic vitality and health equity and environmental justice when we talk about increasing diversity in public lands. I just wanted to add to that before I go straight into my presentation, because I think that's key. I think it's key that when we talk about increasing diversity in public lands, we don't lose sight that this means that really we can't do that if we don't work actively in increasing diversity in the environmental work decision-making space, which is why I founded Americas for Conservation in the Arts. Why I keep telling everybody, when I introduce myself, I like to repeat, like Republicans repeat the same thing over and over. I like to repeat that I am Americas for Conservation in the Arts is the only environmental 501c3 in the state of Colorado, founded by a Latina, with a budget above mid 6 figures. Actually, I'm only one of 3 with a budget above 100. That's scary. In the whole country, I'm only one of 3. So what I want to say is that by having forced myself into a Latina founder of an environmental organization, I was able to also position myself to get into two key boards in Colorado, the City of Denver Office of Sustainability Board and the State of Colorado Office of Outdoor Recreation Industry Board. And by sitting on those boards, I have learned so much about what it actually means to work at increasing diversity in the engagement with our public lands. That it's not really, we spend too much time trying to invite people, come to our spaces, or to talk about increasing access, when really we have to be talking, how are we gonna actively be building capacity for our own communities to be sitting at the table of the decision making of our natural resources. So I just wanted to put that out of the table because I think sometimes it's a little uncomfortable to talk about that, but I think that's la jugular of the problem. So because of that, AFCA launched itself with a congregation of leadership. We launched ourselves in 2011. We hosted our first festival, Prelude, the Americas Latino Eco Festival in 2013, with that specific goal of increasing diversity in the environmental movement. And the first thing we did was what we do as Latinos. We created a fiesta. We created a space where we could gather, where we could learn from each other, where we could stop working in silos and start eating and drinking together, building trust, building collaborations. That festival now is in its 6th year. It has incubated a lot of things. All of our programs, as you see in this timeline, were born out of that festival. In 2014, I had the incredible honor of hosting Dr. Dorchetta Taylor, author of the Green 2.0 report. And by listening to her and reading that report, which actually gave me the data and the metrics to support my own intuitions of how messed up we were as a community within the power base of the environmental movement. Reading that 2.0 report just told me, okay, we have to really get into that education piece, the education, like the connecting and the engagement and the education needed to happen in a space where we could really work at capacity building. So that's why we launched the two key programs that I'll talk about today, which is Promotores Verdes and UCAN, United Culture for Arts and Nature. Promotores Verdes is the umbrella program. It's a family-based program that grows capacity for champions that can become advocates of the health benefits of connecting to nature and our need to protect it. So as you can see, a lot of our work was enabled and supported by an agreement, a 5-year agreement with the U.S. Forest Service back in 2016. Again, it was a visit from an incredible leader, Kimberly Conway, who came to the festival and saw the potential and was able to advocate for the Forest Service to invest in a small leaded environmental nonprofit out of Denver. So the Huitzu Owl Conservation Corp expansion gave us some funding, some seed funding to launch. Actually, we don't house Descubre el Bosque anymore, but we did for 2 years. That was one of our main platforms to increase engagement with the outdoors and with public lands, social media platform. And then through that expansion, we were able to launch our youth leadership development program, which is United Culture for Arts and Nature, and then our Promotores Verdes program. Next slide. And then, let's see, very quickly, I'm going to, before I get Susa, I'm going to have Susa, my deputy director, talk to you very quickly about our bio-blitzes and the history of those bio-blitzes in connecting people with our public lands, but mainly about our bio-blitz this year, which is going to be the most exciting of them all to celebrate National Public Lands Day. But before I go there, I want to say that our Promotores Verdes program, which we seeded in 2017, Out of the first 38 families that we graduated at the festival after going through an 8-week curriculum, we have 15 certified in PLT, in Early Childhood Education Project Learning Tree. We have 20 of them certified as facilitators for environmental and art education, and 6 of them certified as urban community foresters, which is a 6-month commitment, 1 Saturday each month. So with very little capacity, we had an incredible response from our Promotores Verdes families. And we're talking about mothers and grandparents really, really interested, engaged, and totally committed with a program that is culturally sensitive and really, really geared to our needs. So here we go. Susa is gonna very quickly talk to you guys about the BioBlitz and National Public Lands Day.
So hello, everybody. The Descubre el Bosque BioBlitz started in the year of 2015 with a small grant from the National Environmental Education Fund to engage Latino families that were just living outside of the perimeters of the Rocky Mountain Arsenal and Wildlife Refuge. They only saw the fence, they didn't know what the fence was about, didn't have a clue that this was a national land with opportunities for recreation and also habitat restoration. So we brought outlying communities that are actually adversely affected, highly affected by pollution into the space and had a small BioBlitz with families during National Public Lands Day in 2015. And out of this BioBlitz that also was then connected with the theme of pollinator protection and a pollinator-inspired potluck lunch, Zumba dancing as butterflies, and art creation of creating postcards to Mother Earth. After this first event, we decided that we really needed to have this event as being part of the annual festival, to be actually the kickoff with schools. And in 2016, next slide, we started to do these BioBlitzes that focused on outdoor classroom, nature discovery walks, citizen science, and data collection. Next slide, please. Last year we were recognized for being a very innovative and form of connecting scientists and naturalists with students, and then also exposing fourth graders to career pathways. Next slide. This year, we will have actually 4 events instead of having a crazy big event with 450 students. We will have 4 events five events on 4 different types of public land. We have all of these events start out with the blessing of the land by an indigenous elder, then a native nature narrative that talks about the importance of conservation. It includes nature prescription walk and the experience with health professionals, citizen science, the connection with scientists, and career connections. It includes an art activity and stewardship activity. Next slide, please. So this year we're highlighting championing public lands and resiliency, all working with Title I schools from Denver Public Schools that have more than 90% of reduced and free lunch and usually 85% or more Latino population. So as you can see, we have a national site, we have a state park, we work with a local, with the Greenway Foundation, with an area actually that is being envisioned to be turned into a park, where we'll do water quality activities, as well as the students will get a stormwater tour. And then we also use open space from Jefferson County as one of the sites. Next slide, please. I'm switching back to Irene, who will now continue with the youth programming that is under the head of Green Ambassador Program, with partially sponsored by the U.S. Forest Service.
Thank you, Susa. So yes, as I was saying before earlier about the importance of actually building that capacity and increasing the opportunities for our communities to actually be at the decision making table, UCAN serves in part that purpose. It's an environmental leadership program geared to 13 to 17-year-olds. We've run 3 of these 1-week-long congresses. Next slide. 2 in Colorado and 1 in Puerto Rico. It's also part of the expansion thanks to the U.S. Forest support. It's a very, very novel program. It's really totally anchored in arts and culture, and all of the leaders' environmental knowledge and the scientific knowledge, forestry, water quality, water conservation, water literacy, comes mediated through cultural expression. And I think we've hit a very, very interesting formula. Next slide. Yes, so talking about UCAN again, I'm sorry, very quickly. With UCAN, we work with these students and really mediate that engagement with the outdoors in a way that they can also be exposed to careers in natural resources management. And so that as they graduate year after year at different tiers, like for example, this year we had 6 returning students from last Congress, which were then working at a more elevated way of environmental literacy. So the envisioning is that as we get more and more of these students to graduate through different tiers, that we'll get more kids interested in actually entering careers in natural resource management. And so in that way, it's not just about bringing people to the public lands and creating events for engagement that are sporadic, but that we're actually working with our youth to become real interpreters of the land so that they can become stewards of that land. And then we would have like train the trainer kind of model. And so in that same vein, we had the Promotores Verdes, which is, as I was saying, inspired by my listening to Dr. Dorchetta Taylor and reading the Green 2.0 report back in 2014. Promotores Verdes was sort of incubated in 2015 in partnership with CREA Results, which is a very, very wonderful organization in Denver. Great background and pedigree in community health worker model. And so I approached them and asked them to help me adapt the community health worker model to a sort of environmental stewardship model. I gave them sort of the envisioning, and they helped me kind of create a program that actually builds capacity and an economic vitality model for these Promotores Verdes to actually be paid. In the older generation, be paid, you know, for being guides or foresters or whatever it is that they get recruited through organizations, and the younger generation actually get access to experience and knowledge on livelihoods within the environmental space. So Promotores Verdes, as I said before, out of those 38 families that we graduated last year, we had an incredibly high response on members of those families to get certifications in different areas of environmental stewardship. Next slide. And I think we are out of time, but the next few slides go into the program itself of Promotores Verdes. I encourage you to go through these. This presentation had 3 videos that were not able to be uploaded, and I invite you to, we will send that through email. There's a video of the BioBlitz that was produced by Hispanic Communication Network, the U.S. Forest Service, and Benitez Strategies, that tells the testimony of last year's engagement with the 450 4th graders, which is very beautiful. And then there's also a video of primetime news, Fox News, of our Promotores Verdes in the Arsenal U.S. Fish and Wildlife here in Denver. And there's also another video of a beautiful testimony of those students from a school that we work with often. Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Felipe. This was so amazing that you're able to create this platform for all of us. And thank you to the Forest Service as well, and to NIF for all of your support.
Thank you, and thank you to all of the speakers. I think this would definitely be the beginning of a conversation. We need to continue this conversation going. We encourage others. If you want to have similar conversations about other communities, let's do it. Let's unite and let's rally, because this is it's for the good of the hive. It's for for everybody's well-being and for the future of our nation. I'm gonna stop here. Thank you very much. I'm gonna let Sonia finish the last part of this webinar through questions and some final details. So thank you very much, Sonia. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for staying. Even though we've been a little bit over, we'll take a couple of questions. I'm looking here at the webinar chat. Just a reminder, if you need the presentation or any of or the recording, please feel free to email me. I've already received some emails regarding that, and I know some of the panelists have already sent their information on more information. Some of the questions that we have, I think I had one that I saw for Irene. And Tasha Laporto asked if Irene, could you repeat the report that you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hola, Tasha, I miss you. Listen, it's the Green 2.0 report, and if you go to the Green Leadership Trust website, which is sort of the watchdog for the metrics, I mean, not the metrics, but, you know, keeping the big green foundations and federal state agencies working in the environmental space accountable for the diversity rates. You can see the update to the report, which actually came out, I think, 8 months ago. So yeah, Green 2.0, Green Leadership Trust.
Thank you, Irene. And I have another question, and I believe this is Mike Hill that's asking that question, and this is for Robert Garcia. Could you talk a little bit about City Project's current research project with NCCOR?
Yes, thank you very much. NCCOR is the National Council on Child Obesity Research, and they reached out to the City Project with funding from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and from the Centers for Disease Control, and asked us to review programs, trails programs, focused on underserved youth that show evidence of promise of success. So we are looking at that now. We just started this project about 4 weeks ago, and we have a very quick time frame. We have to give them our complete report by end of the year. And we've identified, for example, a range of projects. Some are local, like Anahuac Youth Sports Association and Transit Trails, which I mentioned earlier. A second is Every Kid in the Park, which is the federal program started by President Obama in 2015. It includes the National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, other federal agencies. And in LA, for example, there's, I believe, 11 pilot projects in the nation. The Los Angeles project has taken over 50,000 students on trips to mountains, beaches, and rivers in the LA region. And according to the National Park Service director here in LA, it's more than any other federal agency has done in the same period of time. It focuses, Every Kid in the Park more broadly provides a free pass to every fourth grader in the nation for the student and their families to visit national parks and waters and monuments for free for 1 year. There is also a transportation component for schools that disproportionately serve children who qualify, students who qualify for free and reduced meals. And those students are also children of color, low-income children. Schools don't gather data based on poverty, but they do gather it based on free or reduced meal status. So the Every Kid in the Park is a standard that we're looking at, a baseline. We're not saying it's a best practice or worst practice, but what we're looking for is other trails programs focused on underserved youth that show promise of success. And so anybody on listening to the webinar, if you have suggestions, please by all means email me, rgarcia@cityprojectca.org. We are doing this investigation, as I say, of programs themselves, as well as the gray literature, which is like policy reports published by Corazon Latino or Irene or the City Project. Another academic is looking at peer-reviewed journal articles for that same kind of evidence. And one of the issues is that groups like Anahuac or the NPS, when they do Every Kid in the Park, they don't necessarily gather the data, analyze it, and then submit it to a peer-reviewed journal. So we think our part of investigating actual programs that work is a hugely important component, and we will publish the results after we completed the work in, as I say, December or January of 2019. Thank you very much for that question.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you again to all the panelists and the attendees, especially the ones that could stay a little bit longer for the Q&A. We're gonna wrap it up now. Just FYI, we will be, this is a heavily requested webinar. I have already received so many emails, people requesting for the recording and the presentation. So yeah, just make sure that you email me if you need it. We're gonna post it. So stay tuned on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook page. And I just want to again thank everybody for joining. And this has been very informational. Thank you again, everybody, and we'll be ending the webinar now.
Gracias.
Gracias. Gracias a todos.